Oddly enough, this is not Jeep's first EV, but it is their first EV designed for the North American market and designed by the North American side of Jeep's parent company, sharing that title, of course, with the Dodge Charger, which is closely related to this, even though they don't look much alike. Under the skin, they share an incredible amount. And part of what they share is an electric personality that's not exactly half-baked, but it wasn't exactly ready to leave the oven either. And I think that's been highlighted this week by the fact that we're also driving the Hyundai Ioniq 9. That video is coming up soon. And that is Hyundai Kia's 14th electric vehicle in North America. Even if we include the 2 generations of Fiat 500e, this is Stellantis's 4th vehicle in North America. And the level of polish difference is definitely noticeable. Before we get to all that, I need to tie up a few loose ends. This is a 2025 Wagoneer S Limited, and the EPA range on this model is 294 miles. Every version of the Wagoneer S has dropped from 303 miles down to 294 miles for 2025 due to some unexplained efficiency difference. Also, there's the price tag. The MSRP on this one is an eye-watering $71,790 as tested. The limited trim started at $67,195. That is definitely higher than the Blazer EV or, of course, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, 2 very direct competitors in the United States, not to mention, of course, the Tesla Model Y. But no one is paying that for a Wagoneer S, and that's probably for the best because, again, there's some things about this that I think are not quite fully baked. And that's probably why the actual transaction price is around $45,000 or $50,000. In fact, all of the local dealers near me have a model roughly equipped like this, advertised for about $45,000 or $50,000. That's kind of a problem because if a customer is online shopping and they're looking around, they're gonna go, wow, that is way out of my price range. So they're not even gonna look at a Wagoneer S, and they're gonna go off and buy something that's actually advertised and MSRP'd at $50,000, not realizing, hey, if this is your style, you could get one for about that price tag. So just lock that away in your brain, and we'll come back to that towards the end of the episode. As much as I think this should have been called a Grand Cherokee E/E to kind of play off that 4xe plug-in hybrid naming scheme, I can't fault the design. I think the designers did an excellent job of adapting the Jeep design language to electric car aerodynamic realities. We don't need a grille, so instead of a 7-slot grille, we have a 7-slot top-lit something going on here. I think it works really well, especially at night, really highlighting the fact that this is still a Jeep up front. And not every EV from a mainline manufacturer has done a good job translating their regular design language into an electric vehicle. Sometimes that's good because you get a whole new look, and sometimes it just doesn't fit with the crowd. We get these relatively slim full LED headlights up front, LED turn signals as well, LED fog lights below, and of course the only cooling is happening right down there. There are 2 reasons I think it should have been called a Grand Cherokee. It looks more like a Grand Cherokee than a Wagoneer, and it's sized more like a Grand Cherokee than a Wagoneer. It's 192.4 inches long from tip to tail, 1 inch shorter than a Grand Cherokee, riding on a wheelbase that is 3.7 inches shorter than the current generation Grand Cherokee. That wheelbase is somewhat surprising, since we get a pretty long wheelbase in the related Dodge Charger. The roofline, it is lower than a Grand Cherokee, of course, due to aerodynamics, but part of that's also because it's 2 inches closer to the ground. We have just 6.4 inches of ground clearance in the Wagoneer S. This actually has some of the lowest ground clearances ever in the Jeep lineup. We also have some of the highest curb weight ever in the Jeep lineup. This is a whopping 1,300 pounds heavier than a 4-wheel drive Grand Cherokee at 5,667 pounds. The other way to look at that, of course, is that this is the lightest Wagoneer in the US because the full-size real Wagoneer is notably heavier, although it's an enormous body-on-frame 3-row SUV. And this is really more of a mid-size for the North American market. Back here, you'll notice one of the big changes architecturally versus something like a Grand Cherokee, and that's the fact that even though it looks like the roofline is relatively straight towards the rear, it actually is dropping way down here. We have this enormous wing, and the actual roofline inside follows more or less this angle right here on the outside. That's in order to help improve the aerodynamic profile, but it means we get this absolutely enormous spoiler on top and then a secondary spoiler right there. Below that final spoiler, we have full LED taillights. I think it was a missed opportunity to not sort of mimic the 7-slot grille maybe somehow in that light bar across the back. It's worth noting that we don't really have much of a bumper protrusion in the back, so if you're worried about fender benders, etc., the hatch is relatively low and it's pretty much the same level with the bumper below. Weight is the enemy of all aspects of vehicle performance, not just efficiency, but also crash testing, acceleration, braking, handling, and even ride quality. They're all affected by curb weight. And this weighs more than a Dodge Durango with a 6.4-liter Hemi under the hood. And it's riding on relatively small tires. Well, skinny tires, I should say. 235 50R20s are what we find in every Wagoneer S. Those are notably skinnier than what we find on a Grand Cherokee. The smallest tire there is a 245. Most are going to have a 265 millimeter wide tire, and the top end trims are 275. And remember, it weighs about 1,300 pounds less. You know what also uses a tire that's a 235 50R20? A 3,200 pound Chevy Equinox. So what's going on here, you might be asking? Well, it likely all comes down to the curb weight. When you have high curb weight, but you want high range, something has to give, and that something is the tire. You go for a skinnier tire, a low rolling resistance tire, and that's going to give you better highway driving range especially. It's important to remember that this is not a dedicated EV platform. It's a mixed use platform. So some versions of the STLA large platform will be EVs, some may be hybrids or plug-in hybrids, and some are going to be regular old gasoline vehicles like the upcoming Dodge Charger gas. The tire size is vexing because the electric drivetrain is thoroughly modern and it's quite high output. We have a 100.5 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack, about 97 kilowatt-hours of that is usable, powering twin identical motor units, good for 335 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque each. In the limited trim, you get 500 horsepower total. It's limited in software. 525 pound-feet of torque, but you can unlock 600 horsepower, 617 pound-feet of torque either by selecting a package at purchase or by purchasing an over-the-air update. The way they limit power is interesting. It's the front motor unit that gets the power limit. It's about 200 horsepower maximum if you don't choose that particular option box. Now, Jeep has not fully explained why the range has dropped for 2025, but it is now 294 miles for every model. They used to have listed on the EPA site a model with 270 miles of range and Pirelli tires. That did get me excited what it could handle like with Pirelli tires, but that option has now been removed from the EPA website apparently. As far as charging goes, that is also pretty modern. We have an onboard 11.5 kilowatt AC charger, 203 kilowatts peak on a DC charger, but importantly, the average is quite high with an average charge speed of 140 kilowatts. That will get this from 10% to 80% in 28 minutes. That's a really good showing, even compared to a modern Tesla or even some of those 800-volt EVs out there. Charging happens on the driver's side rear of the vehicle. You'll notice we still have a CCS connector back here, not the newer J3400 or NACS charge connector. They have agreed to that standard and we'll probably see it on new EVs starting in 2026, but we don't have any details on that just yet. You should also know that at the moment you can charge this at Tesla Magic Dock equipped Tesla stations, but you cannot simply roll up to any supercharger station and use an NACS adapter because not all of the agreements have been finalized for this to actually charge at the Tesla supercharger network. That's definitely one big difference between this, the Ford, and the GM EVs, because they all have access right now. It took me a little bit longer than normal to find a comfortable driving position, but once I did, I found these seats to be generally comfortable. Not quite as comfortable as the ones in the Grand Cherokee though, and that mainly has to do with the position of the lumbar support. I find it a little bit too low on the back, and it's only a two-way lumbar. It's not a four-way adjustable lumbar, which is unusual because much less expensive Jeeps have offered four-way lumbar. We do, however, have a powered memory-linked tilt telescopic steering column. It has a reasonable range of motion, and I found that pretty easy to use. The rear seats are also pretty comfortable and quite roomy. That front seat's adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, and I have, let's see here, 7 inches of legroom left. I had no problem fitting a rear-facing child seat behind me with my daughter in it. That was no problem, although we do have more room in the Blazer EV. The Blazer EV is a little bit longer than this, whereas this is a little bit more upright, a little bit more traditional in the seating vibe, and very much like the Grand Cherokee. We do get a tiny bit less headroom in the back than the Grand Cherokee and some of the competition, so my hair is brushing the ceiling here, and I have maybe about a 1/4 inch of headroom left. We also have a very slight hump in the middle of this vehicle, probably used for cabling, something like that. But remember, this is not a dedicated platform EV, so there are a few holdovers from this platform's use under, I don't know, something in the future, whatever that may be. And that's why we find that larger center tunnel there that you'll see in a bit. We have a center armrest that's nice and wide because the rear bench is wider than average for a vehicle in this segment. So if you're looking to put adults and child seats together in the back, it's going to be more comfortable here. And putting the average width child seat here in the center with the shoulder belt comes out of the seat back itself, which is nice rather than out of the ceiling. It's probably less likely to interfere with the outboard seat buckles than some of those narrower seat backs. Behind the power hatch, we find 30.6 cubic feet of cargo capacity, definitely above some of the smaller EVs that you might be cross-shopping against this, but below a Grand Cherokee at 37 cubic feet. The big difference, of course, as I said, is the roof line. You can see right here that the opening is definitely quite a bit lower than the peak roof line of the vehicle. And that does hamper visibility out the back a little bit. But I appreciate the fact that the hatch is pretty high. So right here, I have maybe about 6'1" of clearance between that hatch latch and the ground. So if you're taller than I am, you might start to bop your head there, but most people should be just fine. As we see in other Stellantis vehicles, the button to close that hatch is over there on the side rather than on the hatch itself. I appreciate that because if you're shorter or if you want your kids to be able to reach it, it's going to be a lot easier than having them hop up there for the hatch. But as long as I have lived with a Durango, I still find myself in my own car trying to find the button up here on the hatch every time I want to close the hatch. I swear, absolutely every time I go up here and then I go, oh yeah, it's down there. Cargo volume doesn't tell the entire picture back here because this is a wide and deep cargo area. It's 44 inches wide, 43 inches deep, and under the floor we have, honestly, a spare tire well. It's just that they filled it up with a subwoofer box over there. I am sad they didn't move that somewhere else because they really could have put a full-size spare tire back here. I bet that bolt is even in the place where this platform was designed to have a regular full-size spare in the rear. But we have some additional storage space under there and an unusual style cargo cover. This is not my favorite. This is one of those flip and fold kind. That's the only piece of lightweighting that they managed to do with this vehicle. But basically you kind of try and stick it in these little slots there, and then these pieces you attach to the rear seat headrest. It's not the best design. You might have seen it earlier, but let's take a closer look at the front trunk. I appreciate the fact that we don't get a secondary latch, so it's an electric release there, kind of nice, but it is a pretty small and pretty shallow front trunk area. There's a rubber lining right there, and under here we get your Can-A-Fix-A-Flat and a huge foam divider. So this would actually be significantly more usable if it didn't have that foam divider in it. You could probably put larger gym bags inside. As we look around the interior, keep in mind the base price and of course the average transaction price, which is significantly lower. But the interior is definitely one reason to get this over the Mach-E or the Blazer EV because this interior has better quality parts. I think it's better put together. The fit and finish is nicer, etc. And the design I think is just more attractive to my eye as well. We have a sunglass holder up there, all LED lighting here, the telematics buttons there, buttons for the panoramic moonroof, which does open and it has a shade. So two things that we don't find in a lot of EVs out there. We have slide to the side sun visors, a fabric headliner right there. The panoramic moonroof, it's a little bit wet on top in the sun, you can see right there, but it goes to nearly the rear passenger's laps. It's a pretty typical gasoline vehicle sized panoramic moonroof, so no big sheet of glass there or anything. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, four-way adjustable ratchet style head restraints. You can see right like that. The model we're driving has a charcoal interior. You can see a little bit of contrast work going on here with this piping that's lighter gray, and then the stitching, it's a little bit difficult to see, but it's actually kind of a medium brown there. These seats are heated and ventilated, and they're pretty adjustable. I also found them really quite comfortable, as I said before, so I think it's just a intrinsically good seat design. The difference between something like the Blazer and, of course, the Mach-E and this comes when we start taking a look at the door panels. We do find harder plastics down there at the bottom of the door panel, but we have softer and more premium materials in the in-between. So soft touch armrest there. We have an electronic door release. That's not my favorite. The mechanical door release, it's a little lever right there under those window switches. There is some piano black in here, but thankfully they avoided big strips of piano black by giving us this kind of basket weave thing going on right there for that trim panel. I kind of like that look. We also get a stitched upper section of the doors and a stitched upper section of the dash. The very final section right back there by the speaker grills, that is a hard plastic, but this is all a stitched material. It's an imitation leather. Slim air vents are going on right there. Definitely kind of Grand Cherokee themed. And then we get, of course, the 3-screen setup in the dashboard here. So we have the main infotainment system there running Uconnect. You can turn the screen on and off with that button. You can turn the passenger screen on and off with this button. And then we get the same passenger screen over here that I've complained about in other Stellantis models. I just kind of wish it was almost anything other than this. If you love a passenger side display where you can watch a video or something like that, it's great, but you can't do 2-screen CarPlay. I just wish it was a bit more useful, or just a storage cubby, or I don't know, a piece of wood trim, something like that. I'm just not the biggest fan of this. I wish you could skip it more easily in pretty much every vehicle that it's offered in. Now, as far as the main infotainment screen goes, this is their latest Uconnect software. So, of course, it offers smartphone integration there, like you saw. We also have a decent amount of battery information from the system, but not quite as much as some of the competition. I appreciate the fact that in this software you can have new pages and you can assign different widgets to the different pages. So that's what I've done here. You can actually change what that widget is, and you can, I don't know, you can put now playing on there instead, and that's going to show what's coming from your iPhone. Over here we have the electric driving page. I'll move over here so it's easier to see. This is how you adjust the throttle lift-off regeneration. There are only 2 modes, and then we have creep on or creep off. So no paddles on the back of the steering wheel for adjusting regen. I wish it was a little bit different. There's a more adjustability that I would like to see there. You can also see where your power is going, instant consumption for motors and climate, and you can pop out these displays to the bigger screen there, but you don't have as much information about where that power is going. I also don't find a battery health display in here at all, which is what we're starting to see in more and more new EVs. We can adjust the AC charging level, but only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so you don't exactly have access to amps on a granular level like you do find in some EVs. Your maximum battery charging levels right there. Over on the autonomy front, we have basically just, letting you know that all of your sensors are working, because this does not have the autonomous driving system that we find in some Stellantis vehicles. The rest of the software, it's pretty typical. Of course, we get CarPlay and Android Auto, as I mentioned before, but it doesn't occupy the full screen. The upper portion of the screen is reserved for certain functions like heated seats and heated steering wheels, which are duplicated over here with these buttons on the side. But counterintuitively, to heat the seat, you don't press your finger directly on the seat icon. You actually kind of put it more there towards where the LEDs are going to go. And that did take a bit of getting used to. So some of the alignment on these button areas is just a little bit tricky. We still have a physical volume knob there. And then we have some touch buttons for other system features like the 360-degree camera. I appreciate that direct access button, lane keeping, autonomous parking, again, that passenger screen enable, disable. I think this is a good balance of physical and touch buttons. I do kind of wish that the climate control was made from physical buttons. Instead, we have a touch button bank here with an LCD behind it. You can see actually that is a big LCD that descends right there. So that is kind of a cool look. Although, I just kind of wish that, the screen did something else as well. I found myself just with that rolled up most of the time, so I had access to this pretty big storage area here. You can definitely keep your smartphones, things like that in there. 2 USB-C interface ports. There's an HDMI port for the passenger screen. The Qi wireless charging mat, that's way back here. I think that's actually a pretty handy feature, so you don't have things rolling around in there if you don't want to. We have some big cup holders here. Again, more of that sort of basket weave style trim. Rotary style shifter with park on one side and drive on the other. I kind of wish it was reverse and drive with park as a button, because it makes 3-point turns just a little bit trickier with this setup. Also, unlike many EVs, if you are, say, in drive and you've gotten to where you want to go and you're like, oh, now I would like to stop driving, I'll just press the power button since this is all digital. You can, and it will automatically park, but you'll notice it doesn't turn off the car. So you then have to go and hit that power button again to actually turn off the vehicle. I think that's just an unnecessary second step that we don't find in competitive EVs. And of course, we don't have that ability to just put your foot on the brake and shift right to drive in this vehicle either. Down here, we have the drive mode selector: Sand, Snow, Eco, Auto, and Sport. Auto brake holds right over there. Pretty soft touch armrest in the center, revealing a medium-sized storage area right there. Storage is a bit at a premium because you'll notice we have a big traditional transmission tunnel right here. And that's because this is riding on, again, the same STLA platform as the gasoline version of the Charger and likely the next generation Grand Cherokee as well. Moving on up here, we have A head-up display, color of course, nice big full LCD instrument cluster, relatively configurable, although not as configurable as some. I do appreciate some of the various looks that we get in here and the more digital appearance look that we find there. But oddly, the moving map display is only driven by the car's internal mapping engine. If I use Apple CarPlay, I just get that annoying message right there. The steering wheel, it's kind of a Squircle style steering wheel with a flat bottom and a flat top, somewhat flattish sides. Decent sport grips over here though, no paddles on the back, but we do find the volume up down and track up down buttons on the rear of the steering wheel. Over on this side we find the buttons for the adaptive cruise control, which is standard, Wagoneer logo right there in the middle, and I kind of appreciate the two-spoke design. It does make it easy to hold that spoke right down there and drive, if you like that. Over here we have a button module that controls that multifunction display, and then the typical turn signal stalk over there. If you're a fan of regular buttons and switches, you'll appreciate that we have headlight controls over here that are buttons, a button for that front trunk, regular buttons and switches for the windows, side view mirrors, etc., and of course the seat memory over there on the driver's side. But we also have a big piece of piano black that is already showing some scratches. It's finally time to get this out on the road, and hold on to your hats because it is definitely going to be a wild ride. Whoops. If I floor it, we spin the tires up until about 30 miles an hour, and this is the model without the performance upgrade package. If you get the performance upgrade package, you're laying 4 stripes on the road until you practically hit about 40 miles an hour. This one went 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds. The best 0 to 60 time I was able to get out of the performance trim, 3.6 seconds. I have no doubt 3.4 seconds would be possible if you could get the launch just right. And launching this is oddly tricky. If you want the best 0 to 60 time, you're going to want traction control disabled, you're going to want that performance package, and you're going to want to feather that accelerator pedal just right, because if you're too aggressive, all you end up with is wheel spin. So with summer tires, slightly wider tires, I bet 3.4 seconds is possible. With this model, you still have to be careful. We don't get as much power up front, but you still get front wheel spinning at 35 miles an hour if you romp on the accelerator pedal. This is bonkers kind of silly. And if there's one company that does stupid really well, it's definitely Jeep and their parent company, Stellantis. Just think of the Hellcats and the SRTs, etc. They do crazy really, really well. And this is that same kind of crazy electrified, with one exception. At least with the SRTs and the Hellcats, they put appropriate tires on them. Sometimes they're under-tired, sure, but generally speaking, decent tire upgrades over a regular model in the lineup. This is not the case with this model, and that's why it took us 138 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. And there's definitely a lot of squeal, a lot of drama, and sometimes the vehicle doesn't go exactly in the perfect straight line just because there's so much weight to try and harness. So if I just romp on the brake pedal here, that's pretty linear, but the ABS is doing an awful lot of work, and those distances get really long. This is actually one of the longest stopping distances for a vehicle that we've tested in a long time that's not a heavy-duty truck or a cargo van or something with really knobbly off-road tires. It just has to do with the tire size here. Now, these tires definitely are better tuned towards lateral grip than acceleration or braking, so when it comes to the handling score, I'll give this a C. It's not because of the grip, which is below Blazer and Mach-E when we're talking about comparable vehicles. I think it's actually okay. The reason I'm going to give this a C is the feel. The steering feel, it's just not very connected. It feels, I don't know, off somehow. We also get a lot of body motion, so a lot of bumping and rolling in the corners because the springs are a little on the firm side, so the front end kind of hops and bops over the corners a bit. It's not a confidence-inspiring feel. It is fun because when you go over bumps like that, all of a sudden all the wheels start breaking loose again, and there is a certain joy to that. Better turn the traction control back on there. But it's not exactly well sorted. I would say, even as heavy and as marshmallowy sometimes as a Blazer EV SS can be, it is definitely well ahead of this when it comes to the sporty performance handling polish side of things. It's definitely a better polished vehicle, as is the Polestar 3, which could be a competitor here. The Tesla Model Y, also solid step above this when it comes to the driving tuning, the handling feel, the steering feel, etc. It's possible that the shape of the steering wheel is at least partially to blame here, because if you're driving this hard out on your favorite winding mountain road, especially tighter winding mountain roads, and you're letting the steering wheel unwind, your angle of attack and your leverage just changes, and then of course you're kind of bumping along these bumps as you go. When it comes to the ride quality, I'm going to have to drop our preliminary score from an A all the way down to a C. And that's because when we were first driving the Wagoneer, it was out on relatively smooth roads. That's pretty logical. Jeep, of course, chose the drive routes that we were all driving on. Now I'm able to drive this on my usual road surfaces, and on this gravel road surface, you'll notice that there is a lot of body motion, and you can feel a lot of the small bumps and imperfections coming into the cabin. Now, this does make sense. Given the curb weight of the vehicle and the relatively low ground clearance, there's not enough ability to have a lot of suspension travel to soak up those bumps and jostles. If this had had the same kind of ground clearance we find in a Grand Cherokee, it would probably be able to ride better because there'd be at least some ability to have more suspension travel and soak up more of those bumps. Ride quality is definitely an area where especially the Blazer EV excels over this. The Blazer is actually quite comfortable. It's not exactly lightweight, but it's on the softer side of things. This is oddly enough on the firmer side of things, even though it has a Jeep logo on it, and generally Jeeps have been a little bit more rough road capable, so a little bit softer suspension, a little bit more comfortable. This is kind of a different Jeep in that respect. I will say though that the Mach-E's ride quality, it's firm and bouncy, as we find in the Model Y as well, so those are kind of just different ends of the same sort of stick, I guess you could say. This is not my favorite suspension tune, but neither is the suspension tune exactly in the Mach-E or the Model Y. Something like a Polestar 3, it's definitely going to be more comfortable than this, or really any of the options with an adaptive suspension system or an adaptive air suspension. And Polestar 3, it's priced kind of in this same range, as long as we're talking about MSRP, of course. If you don't frequently drive on rough roads, you're probably not going to be bothered by the ride quality as much. Out here on this road surface, I think it's fine. You will notice those bumps in the road, but you will really notice them more out on a gravel road surface or just a really badly paved road surface. If you live in an area like, I don't know, Detroit, or actually quite a lot of the Bay Area too, where we have really badly paved side roads, you might want to think about something just a little bit more comfortable. On the other hand, even though the ride is going to be a little firm, the cabin is very quiet. We measured 58 decibels in here, making this one of the quieter EVs that we've ever tested. Efficiency is also not half bad. As I said, the drivetrain is thoroughly modern. Of course, the tires are also pretty skinny, but we've been averaging 3.15 miles per kilowatt hour over a week of mixed driving. That puts this right around 300 miles of real-world range for my driving style, which does take me up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass. So on the EV side of things, I think it's okay. But there's some additional things going on here. The level of polish is problematic. Efficiency is good, quietness is good, regenerative braking blending in, that is not as smooth as I would like. So if, for instance, we're in the low regen mode here, I put my foot on the brake pedal, we're getting additional regenerative braking because this has a blended braking system, and I need to transition from a mild to a more moderate braking event, there's kind of a moment of nothingness. It feels kind of like a early 2000s Toyota Prius in the way that the regenerative braking blending is going on here. Also, we don't have as much control over it as we find in other vehicles. I can go back to the home display, but I have to dig around in here, and I can set my regeneration level over here to maximum. It's actually going to be fairly aggressive regeneration. If I turn the creep off, then we basically have one pedal driving, so nobody's coming up behind me here. So let's go ahead and go all the way down here. So we're 30 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour. It actually feels pretty good as far as the stop down here. Takes us to complete stop, holds us there, no problem. If you'd rather have creep, you can turn that back on there. But there's no ability to adjust it like we find in so many new EVs out there with paddles or with any sort of buttons, etc. in easy reach. And I would appreciate at least a shortcut button maybe to switch between those two regenerative braking modes. It'd also be nice to have more information on general consumption, a button where you could command the battery to warm up for faster DC fast charging, and just better reporting around what is going on with the vehicle and efficiency. Things that we do see in most of the competitive vehicles out there, where you can see recent trips and how many miles per kilowatt hour you've done in really easily readable fashion. There's some simple graphs in there, but they're not the best, and we don't get the same kind of information readily available and accessible that we find in some of the competition. We also don't have things like a range, where it would say right now 189 miles of range, but treat it gently, treat it poorly, you could get somewhere within that range as far as your actual driving range. Highway driving range is reasonable here. City driving range obviously is better, but more information is always going to help out the driver.
Being underbaked isn't always a bad thing. For instance, I don't need my chocolate chip cookies to be crisp. They could be chewy, they could be well underdone, or they could just be cookie dough, and I will eat them all just the same. A souffle, on the other hand, though, if that's underbaked, it just tastes like raw egg, and that's revolting. Where in this spectrum is the Wagoneer S? Well, I'll leave that to you to decide, but it's probably going to come down to your particular priorities and what you're looking for in an EV, and how that relates to its price tag, of course. Now, the Wagoneer S's price tag, we do need to talk about that because it spans from $67,195 on up to $75,285. It's a really narrow window because every Wagoneer S comes really well equipped. We get the leather upholstery. I think the interior actually is really nicely done in the Wagoneer. It's definitely given off high-end Grand Cherokee vibes. Jeep has done a really good interior design in a lot of their vehicles, with the exception of the passenger screen. Not the biggest fan of that design. I kind of wish they made it just a storage compartment, or even if it was just a piece of wood or something like that, I would be totally fine with. But aside from that, the audio system is fantastic. The Macintosh audio systems really are very good in Jeep's latest models. The interior design and comfort, I think, is also really well done. And the pricing, well, you're not really going to be paying $67,000 for your Wagoneer S. Currently, the national discount program runs between $7,750 or $15,250 off, depending on exactly which Wagoneer trim and build you're looking at. So definitely pretty steep discounts, bringing most models down to around $50,000 or even lower, depending on where you're looking at as far as around the country for your new Wagoneer S. I have seen people out the door even in the $40,000 range, so big discounts are happening. And that is also happening with most of the competition, though. That's the tricky part here. So a Cadillac Lyriq spanning from $60,600 or so on up to about $99,000-ish for the fully loaded models. No one's really going to be paying full price for those models. Maybe a Lyriq V, something like that. Ditto, a Chevy Blazer EV, Ford Mustang Mach-E. There are fewer discounts there, but as you can see, it's also one of the less expensive options in this segment. So the least expensive Wagoneer S is actually more expensive than the most expensive version of the Mach-E as far as MSRPs go. To try and keep this episode as short as possible, let's just talk about one competitor, the model that I think I would buy if I were shopping in this segment, which is roughly the larger mid-size two-row SUV EV segment. I would probably get a Polestar 3, although I might wait for next year's Polestar 3 because it's going to get the 800-volt architecture that we see launching in the Volvo EX90. The Polestar 3 hasn't been around for very long, neither has the Volvo, but they are developing their products actually more rapidly than other car companies, more traditional car companies, I should say. So even though it's only been on sale for a short while, they've actually decided to give it all new motors, new batteries, new chargers, etc. At any rate, the Polestar rides better than the Wagoneer S. It's more comfortable than the Wagoneer S. It also is a bit more premium in terms of its fit and finish and assembly quality on the inside. The Jeep is pretty good, but I don't think it actually is Polestar 3 level, even though the pricing is actually a little bit lower on Polestar 3 at the moment. The rear-wheel drive model is $67,500. You'll actually get some pretty solid discounts on the Polestars. Right now they're taking about $18,000 off of new Polestar 3s, and that is just where things are starting in this EV segment, because without the tax credit, we just don't know where any of these prices are going to go, and we don't know what the updated 800-volt Polestar 3 is going to be priced like. But we do know that the Polestar 3 offers fantastic range. I think it actually is better than the Wagoneer S in real-world driving. We also have the option of that single-motor model if you want one, for instance. The top-end versions of the Polestar 3 are not as crazy quick, but they certainly handle better, and dynamically it is superior to the Wagoneer S. The Wagoneer's driving dynamics, they kind of bugged me a bit. I think it would make more sense if it had significantly wider tires, and it did seem like Jeep was going to give it wider tires at some point in time, but that just has fallen off the radar. If they'd put 305 width tires on it, yeah, the range would suck, but it would also handle better, and then the firm suspension would make a lot more sense. And the motor package and the crazy output that we get would also make more sense for me. That's part of that half-baked nature. Now, that's easy to fix yourself as long as those tires would fit under the body, but if body modifications were required, then, that's more of the souffle kind of half-baked problem. And that brings us along to the pros and cons of the Wagoneer S. I think on the pro side, it looks good. The charging is actually quite solid, whether we're talking about AC charging or DC charging. The performance is very, very good. That's definitely a big win. I appreciate the fact that we get essentially symmetrical motors in this model as well, something that we don't see in all the competition. This is sort of a nod to Jeep's typical off-road capability, where you can actually send a reasonable amount of power to the front or to the rear. But then it's weird that we don't have the ground clearance you'd expect in a Jeep. And that's maybe one of the other things I would change. I would give it Grand Cherokee-like ground clearance so it could be more of a Jeep. Focus more on that off-road side of things where we don't really find much competition. There's Rivian. They don't have a two-row vehicle in this segment yet. There's some off-roady trim packages in other EVs, but as far as a more capable two-row EV Grand Cherokee sized, I think it's a missed opportunity in that area. And really, that's the con side for the Wagoneer. It's full of missed opportunities, I would say. It's on the expensive side. And then the electrical bits, especially in software, are not as well polished as I would like. Now, I will say at the end here that a lot of this, I think, can be addressed in software. They could redesign the software controls so that way it's easier to engage the various different levels of regen. They could give it more levels of regen. They could fix the regenerative braking, etc. They could give it some better, more interesting EV screens. Like if we take a look at a lot of other EVs out there, they will show you exactly where your power is going. They give you more detail about that. The EV routing is better done than we find in this model. They'll give you things like battery health, and you can see how much of your original battery life you have left, etc. All of that could be addressed in software. The hardware things that can't be addressed in software, I'm actually a little bit less concerned about those being a big issue, because they really just come down to suspension tuning and tires. Both of those things I think would be easy for Jeep to address. But let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. And what would you choose if you were shopping in this segment? Bearing in mind that price is everything, if you get a really good price on the Wagoneer S, I don't think it's a problem. If you're buying one for about $40,000, that's a pretty good deal, because you get a lot of SUV, you get a really nice interior, and a lot of speed for not a lot of cash. I know a lot of people actually out there have commented in saying they got some crazy screaming deals on their Wagoneer S. On the other hand, if you're paying closer to full price, I would just run out and pick almost anything else in this segment. I think Mach-E is getting on a little bit. They have been tweaking it, poking and prodding it here. I think the Audi Q6 has got a little bit of missed promise as well. But other than that, I think any of these other options actually are pretty solid. The Cadillac is also a pretty solid option. The seats aren't as comfortable, but it's got General Motors behind them, and GM has been pushing out a lot of EVs lately, and their software has definitely been getting better as a result. See all of you later.